So today's session is about vibe coding, and I'm sure there are questions. There will be some at the end. I think we've got about 5 minutes at the end for questions. But a lot of this is just going to be a discussion. And before we start, I just wanted to start with some introductions. So we can go maybe from the end, Diamond, if that's OK with starting with you.
Hey, I'm Diamond. I'm the Director of Engineering and AI at Datadog, working on our AI agents and more. I've been in AI or ML for like 15-ish years. That makes me quite old in this space. From far before we started doing a lot of the deep learning stuff that we're doing now, and very excited to be talking about vibe coding.
Right on.
Hey everyone, Anoop. I work at OpenAI. Been there for about a year now. I spend most of my time working with customers on two main areas, voice and reinforcement fine-tuning. Excited to chat about vibe coding today.
And yourself?
Yeah, I'm Sabrina. I work over at GitHub. I'm currently on the Copilot team. I've been at GitHub for the past 3 years, but only for a few months on Copilot. Before that, I was on billing. So really excited to talk about vibe coding.
That's awesome. OK, so I'm going to get started with like a softball question, just because vibe coding has become a bit of a, let's say it's a trend, perhaps, or becoming trending. And I kind of want to know what each of you think about vibe coding, or what it means to you. We don't need to make it long or anything like that. But for you, Sabrina, what's your vibe coding, maybe not definition, or like what do you think of when we say that?
Yeah, so I think I'm a little less traditional when it comes to vibe coding, because I don't just let AI run amok, as some might say. I really look at every single line of code that's still coming out. But to me, vibe coding is I'm putting in only prompts, only English, and I'm letting my models write all of my code for me.
Gotcha. How about yourself, Anoop?
Yeah, maybe I'm a little further along in the spectrum of I let the models cook a little bit more. I'd say for me, it is like there's the spectrum of control. You're in control versus like the model's in control. I'd say like 75% of it I just give to the model, and I spend most of my time like writing high-level ideas or abstract concepts for the models to implement.
That's really cool. What about you, Diamond? Sorry, we're going in order here.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's a bit of a definition question. Like right? For augmented coding, I'm more on the like use Copilot, look at every line of code. But when I think of vibe coding, it's like YOLO mode all the way, right? You just got to let it go, figure things out, and see what happens.
Yeah, I might have made a face there, but yeah. So I guess sometimes when you're approaching YOLO mode, there can be some maybe caution involved. But because we're like introducing yet another acronym here, what would you say YOLO mode is? Kind of like hands off?
Fully hands off.
Okay.
Let it run some commands. Maybe it'll delete your, full OS. I don't know, but let it do stuff. Let it check things. That's what I want. I want the, the codex experience where it's like, just tell it what to do, and I'll come back later that day after I'm done doing other stuff.
That's amazing. Anoop, are you on the YOLO?
Yes, I'm very much on the YOLO side. I think what I do is I basically have like 4 different terminal tabs, or maybe like 4 different web pages open, and I just do the same task like 4 times. One of them hopefully works, and then I can get started from there.
Interesting. I feel like I'm in the minority here, because I've certainly tried YOLO mode, but most of the time I'm more vibe coding. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm definitely in the same boat. I'm worried about an RM-RF happening all over my work machine and being like, I'm really sorry, GitHub, but it's going to be a minute.
Now, when you're in like an IDE or a terminal, are you using a specific tool, or are you using a bunch of tools, different models? I guess it doesn't matter who answers first, but I'm curious about like maybe the how. I think we've covered the why, so experimentation, speed, and being able to try new ideas. But I do wonder about the tool that you're using, not that it really matters, but because I feel like I might be using different tools than you all are.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on what I'm doing, at least.
Okay.
The side projects, the fun things, the prototypes, that's kind of the YOLO mode thing where I can pull out Claude Code, I can pull out Codex. I try them both out depending on the day. Codex, I can go on my phone, which is nice.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah,
okay.
It's pretty cool. Sometimes I'm like walking my son to the park.
And coding?
And code, honestly, yes. I've been like pushing a stroller before, and then like I have an idea, I was like, I gotta try this out, and I go to Codex, type it in real fast.
Oh, I assumed you were talking maybe. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it works out. But then smaller, more pointed things, things that I would allow to actually happen at work. So don't worry, I don't use YOLO mode at work. Is like, go and get out VS Code or Cursor, and can have very specific things myself.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'd say I'm kind of similar in that sense. Maybe like for 0 to 1 projects, I'm probably using Codex for the most part as like the daily driver. And then for when I'm actually spending most of my time coding, it's typically Cursor or using those like 0 to 1 tools to get started with 40% of the way there, and then spending the rest of my time actually in Cursor or like any other IDE.
Gotcha. So you're iterating quickly to a certain point and then finishing off that last mile, or if it's 60%, the rest of what needs to be done.
Exactly.
Okay. And are you sort of in the same boat? Again, I feel like I'm in the minority here. Maybe I'm just a little bit more cautious. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I spend a lot of my day, obviously, in GitHub Copilot.
Right.
But when I can't sleep at night, I spend my time on Claude on the app, and I'm just talking system design to Claude and thinking about what I'm going to be doing the next day. Especially when it comes to side projects. But I spend a lot of time in GitHub Copilot, but I think that's something that a lot of people don't do that they should try and do more is switching their models as they're doing things. So as I'm working on maybe something that's a little bit more challenging, I'm going to a smarter or a thinking model, right? And maybe as I'm using something that's really simple and I just want to get it done very quickly, I can go to a faster model. And I find that a lot of the people I talk to only use like the base models, and of course they're going to be great, but I just think that there might be more to experimenting with other models.
Gotcha. So for you, the difference between getting an answer back quickly versus a slower but maybe more complete answer might depend on what you're working on.
Exactly. If I'm working on something that I know is going to be a little bit more complex and maybe Copilot might struggle, or I feel like we might get into this like thought loop, then I'm going to go to a smarter model or a thinking model, and I'm going to be a little bit more patient, but I'm going to get really good results from it.
Now, you mentioned something in there that's more like an IRL problem. So as a person, you get context that's swimming around in your brain,
Yes.
and you write it down before the next day where you pick up the context. When you're switching models, how do you keep that context between those different sessions?
I actually asked the model to write the context for me. So I'm like, okay, if I'm going from this model to another model, can you summarize this for me? What's going to be the best way that I get, the most out of my prompt? And I think it's really just breaks down to keeping your prompts simple enough that the model can retain a lot of information, but also giving it just enough reference material so that this way it can be really useful and kind of follow the prior art and the code and get some really good code out there.
That's amazing. So I've used like todo.md or claude.md or maybe like errors or future things. Are there any other tricks that I'm missing, Anoop or Diamond, in terms of like keeping that context for myself as well as the model?
Yeah, I guess if you're using Cursor or any other IDE or a codex, there's typically like some sort of markdown file or Cursor rules that you can create, and usually I always have some sort of analogous thing to that. The other thing is, I think all these tools are now having like web search integrated, so you can always have, here's the docs I want you to look up, which I do a decent amount because the models aren't always up to date with the most recent documentation that exists.
Right, so you're trying to address like the cutoff date problem.
Yeah.
For example, if it's done training in 2020 and a newer version of the library came out, okay.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, project context there is very important.
Oh, okay.
And I do think another technique that I use, and I've seen many folks use too, is kind of keeping a scratch pad in some sense, that you maybe not even a scratch pad, something that kind of develops prompts over time.
Yeah.
So you'd say, hey, this prompt worked really well that I spent some time on for doing this particular feature work.
Oh.
And maybe I'll go back and reuse that prompt again.
Gotcha. Just like switching out what you need for the current project?
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of structure I find helps a lot, especially if you iterate on these over time. It's a bit of the like fixing this garbage in, garbage out problem where many times, you just jump into these tools and you're like, I know what I want, kind of, I can't really describe it. It's a good way to be like, oh, here's something I did last time that worked pretty well that had a little bit more structure.
Gotcha, yeah. Garbage in, garbage out is a good way to describe my code. Now, so we talked a little bit about use cases. So throwaway codes, iteration, trying new things. Are these, so we talked about personal projects, obviously corporate projects as well. Is there a mix there? Is this primarily for work, primarily for fun? Is it 50-50? Or I find myself having a fun time coding now, which was a surprise to me. Like, this is actually interesting to learn new things, such as front end. Are you in the same boat, or is it more like just get stuff done?
Yeah, for me, I'm using Copilot every single day at work. I think they'd be disappointed if I wasn't, right? And I think it's a great tool, and it makes me just so much more efficient. But I'm definitely also using it on side projects. I will write like an entire side project in a weekend now, and of course I'm careful with security and things like that. And most of them will just live on localhost. But yeah, I love to write code again, and I think it's because I can vibe code, because I can say like, I don't have to be bogged down with technicalities and in writing syntax anymore. I can just focus on high-level architecture and design, and that's so exciting.
Gosh, what about you two? Are we personal coders? Are we excited in coding in, or is it still just? I've seen a lot of nodding. This is awesome.
Yeah, as long as I don't have to remember random syntax all the time, I'm pretty happy, and the models help a ton with that, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I think it's a mix. I mean, like, I like coding a lot. I have a lot less time for it as a manager nowadays. And so this kind of helps me move quickly to try things out and, write the code that I want to write, maybe some, something new that I want to develop, rather than a lot of the boilerplate that sits around it, or a lot of the things that I'm not a front-end guy. I'm pretty bad at front-end. You can go and check my personal website if you want to prove that to yourself. And so I love to have these things kind of build out the front-end for me, and then I can work on the back-end, which I like doing.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in the same boat. Like when it comes to front-end, for me, it's less of a crutch and more like a third hand, or maybe someone pairing with me beside me who's actually helping me out. That's really cool. Now, so this is a pretty open-ended question, and I'm sure there will be questions about this after, but I kind of want to know if there's any tips that you have that might not be as common. So we covered one, which is the context at the end of the day, which I love. Are there other like MCPs that you use all the time, or different ways of using the tool? Like, I think, I want to say walking your child. That is, as you're going for a walk with your child, coding, I think, is pretty interesting. That code snacking approach, I think, is interesting to me. Are there any other tips that we can give to people?
I do think I'm very bullish on parallelism as you start coding.
You said 4 at once, right?
It's very nice that you can start just kicking off. Like, imagine you just walk into work every morning. You have maybe 5 tickets you want to work on. You kick off 25 tasks, and then hopefully like 5 of those 25 are directionally good. I think that is going to be a whole new way we start working together. Imagine you just have 25 like engineers you can start work with every day. That's maybe a future that's like pretty exciting, that you can just delegate work so easily and have multiple people do the same thing.
They also don't feel bad if there's multiple people doing the same thing.
And you cancel the project.
Again, yes, as a manager, it's complicated. If you're like, I want 5 of you to do the same thing, one of you will win. The rest of you, not so much. But
not the right corporate culture.
We can do that with the agents now, which is nice. I think the multiple kicking off a lot in parallel is really important. I also am a huge fan of using GitHub and actually, saying, hey, I'm going to be having different branches for different features. I'm going to kind of check in things frequently. That way, it's going to screw up. When it screws up, I can go back. It's fine. I can go back to a point in time that I was happy with it, or I can just blow away a whole branch, right? That's fine. Now,
are you committing to GitHub or committing locally?
Sometimes both. It kind of depends on like if I think I'm pretty happy with what is that, the current state. I push it up. But if I'm not, then that's just local stuff. But it really just depends on kind of how I'm feeling about it. Because there's so many times where you're doing work that you get to a point where you're like, I'm almost there, I just need some tweaks.
Right.
And then you go and tweak it and you just kind of like mess everything up.
Definitely been there, yeah.
Yes. So like that kind of close but not quite there is something that I do check in frequently.
Just one more question on that thread, if you don't mind. Are you using pre-commit hooks or post-commit hooks or anything like that when you're using Git? Not so.
No, just ask it to hit the commands, or I do.
Very interesting. I like it. How about yourself? Are there any other tips that you've got for us that we can use?
Yeah, I think if you're not getting good results, work on your prompts. I think that a really big thing is prompting, right? So we all probably speak very differently to, Copilot or whatever we're using. I know I'm a big please and thank youer, even if he uses tokens, that's fine. I want my AI overlords to remember me.
I feel like as a Canadian, I also, thank you and sorry.
Yeah, I'm big on the please and thank you, but really just work on your prompts, because maybe they're too vague, or maybe they're too specific, or maybe they're too big, or maybe they're too small. And we're coming from 2 years ago where I could barely use the tab completion in my editor to now where I can have, Copilot writing full-fledged features for me or giving me code reviews. So I think, I'm not trying to say that we're the problem if it's going poorly, but I think that we can also be better at working at it. So just learning how to use this tool the same way you'd have to learn how to use any Datadog tool is your best bet.
Gotcha. So when you start off, are you giving like the context of the project to the prompt, or do you have a detailed like PRD, or is it just a one-liner? What does that look like? Okay.
It depends on
That's
how
a good
big
engineer
the feature
answer.
is.
Yeah.
It depends on how big the feature is. But I think for the most part, I remind Copilot that I would like it to follow the prior art of the code base to make sure that I'm really following those same patterns that my fellow engineers want to follow. And then from there, I'm just kind of guiding it, whether it's based on a system design or a Figma design or whatever it may be. And I get more specific or less specific as I go.
Gotcha. So the Figma design kind of piques my curiosity because I think one of the things that happened maybe 2, possibly 3 years ago is that multimodal aspect of models. Are you using screenshots of things or sketching things out on a napkin and taking photos? What does that look like when it comes to multimodal? I'm seeing more nodding here, and it feels like I'm missing the boat on the picture side of things.
Yeah, I don't necessarily draw out any sketches, but I mostly use like existing like Figma mocks that maybe like a design team worked on as a like, hey, I just want this. Can you recreate this website using the same stack we're using? Or if I'm building something 0 to 1 and I want to maybe like replicate some like design I really liked, I would just send that to maybe like a V0 or a Lovable, and then they can handle a lot of that front end complexity that maybe I'm not the best Next.js engineer, and they can handle that for me.
Gotcha. So on top of the IDE, you might be just testing some ideas out with more Vibecoding platforms, I guess, or tools, I guess, at this point in time. So the V0, the Lovables,
yeah.
there's a few of them. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, another one that I try is sometimes I'll use like Draw.io or like any of the kind of sketching applications, and then you can just kind of grab a screenshot of that and put it into places like Claude Code or any of the other ones out there. And multimodal kind of interactions helps me a lot, again, because like I'm really bad at Figma too. So like every time you're like trying to tweak things, I'm like, I don't really know what to do there. I'd rather just sketch it out real quick and then just let the model figure it out. It's probably smarter than me with that stuff.
That's really interesting. Now, one thing I have done is talk to models, generally not vibe coding, but when I'm trying to come up with a prompt or a PRD or what have you, is that something that you try once in a while, or maybe not so much?
Just chit-chatting?
Just chit-chatting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, how's your
I felt a little bit like I feel like the person going for a walk and it's like, hey, tell me what's new in Next.js. It's like I'm sure anybody listening to me is like, who is he talking to? Okay, I'm not alone.
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, fair. Let's normalize talking to your assistant.
You can talk to your system. But I do think on that point, the kind of back to the PRD work, I think using a ChatGPT or Cloud Experience to better structure your PRD, better structure your specs, is a completely reasonable thing. Sometimes I start with an idea that I don't want to just throw directly into coding. That's pretty vague, and I would say, hey, how would you specify this a little better? What kind of questions would you ask? What kind of ideas would you have to flesh this out into a better defined spec? And that's a good way to go back and forth before you go straight to code.
Yeah, and then maybe one more thing to add to that is typically I have like some templates of one, how I like prompt structured, and also questions that I've just asked ChatGPT it's too many times. I'm like, I can just copy and paste to these same templates the like questions for whatever feature I'm trying to work on next. And I don't have to do a ton of work, and I can get like a pretty robust prompt pretty quickly, and then use that to iterate.
That's really cool. Now, sometimes when I'm dealing with prompts, I feel like maybe the leveling of the prompt is wrong. What I mean by this is like, when I want code, I might say, hey, as a Google staff engineer, write me some code. But I feel like when the PRD, it might be the opposite. It's like I need to describe the problem as simple as possible. Have you tried role-playing? Are there certain personas that work better, or is this not something that you've reversed yet?
I just threaten them. No.
Threaten them? Oh, you're the all caps prompter.
Oh, no. I try to, I don't usually use personas myself.
Okay.
I think I mostly just try to set project context of like, what's the project we're working with? What are the tools we're working with? But I have seen some best practices that say sometimes personas can help.
I'm not sure if it helps or not. It's just something that I'm doing. Like I don't have a frame of reference, I guess, a lot of the time. So it's difficult for me to tell what the output is if it serves the usage, but I do notice, at least for PRDs, the language that's output is a little bit less complicated, which for me as more of like a junior intermediate engineer, that worked for me as like a specification sheet, but yeah, I guess I don't have any real opinions there. What about yourself?
I'm always telling it to explain it to me like I'm 5.
Oh, that's a good
I'm like,
one.
no matter how long I've been in engineering, I just want to know everything like I'm 5 because I think that's nice. It gives me great analogies all the time, and I can then be like, okay, let's bump up the technicality a little bit. But That's the only persona I've really used, is that I'm a 5-year-old, which, kind of tracks.
Fair enough. I have noticed the analogies are actually quite good, though. So
They
a lot of times
are.
when you're going through code, it'd be like, imagine this was, it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. Actually, I totally understand this problem now. Are you both using these tools to explain code that is written, or are you more like, if the experiment doesn't work, move on?
I do a lot, especially if I'm starting in a new section of a code base or like trying to learn something for the first time, or even docs, for example. Like, can you explain these docs?
Oh, I haven't tried that before.
So yeah, I do a ton of that if I'm starting anything new. It's just a much easier way of getting started than pinging someone, hey, can you explain X, Y, and Z to me? Or trying to like wrangle through a bunch of different files that are brand new.
Got you. So the pre-work involves like
Yeah.
grokking the docs and then giving the context to it. Okay.
Yeah, from a professional point of view, I think outside of the vibe coding aspect, understanding your code base, the features, what people are doing, especially if you're jumping between code bases like you might sometimes with different folks, different customers, or for me, I have, again, I don't code a lot or code very much at all in our production code base. So whenever I see a new PR that comes out and I'm curious about it, it's a lot easier to ask questions using systems like this than to go and spend the time to ramp up on one of the projects a team is working on that I haven't looked at in a few weeks kind of thing.
That's really cool. Now, do you do the opposite? Have you done like a review of your code with an agent before? Does that help at all, or is that?
I have not. It's probably a good idea. I have not, though.
Is anybody else? I'm asking because I definitely do. It's like, did what I just write track? Like, am I repeating myself too much? Have I defined this variable 3 times?
I do a little bit. Sometimes there's a lot of AI slop, so you gotta clean it up a little bit.
That's fair.
Yeah, I do it a lot. Especially if I'm writing my own code, I try to ask Copilot to take a look at everything for me so that I'm getting like this initial code review before I even ask someone that's more senior on my team to look at it. Then I've already had like one kind of iteration of that code review, so it's kind of nice.
So you basically, like, you've gone through one iteration, so you know it's past a certain bar.
Exactly. I know that at least there's, no silly console logs or something left over, or something that I could have caught, should have caught when I was actually just putting my code up for review, but now I already have this like first iteration.
Gotcha. Now, it sounds like Git is something we're using across all of us. Are we in Git ignore a lot, trying to define like what goes to Git or not? Because I heard that sometimes the context can depend on what's in Git ignore, depending on the model, or depending on the context that you're giving to a project. Or are you primarily just giving them one file at a time? Sorry, I'm personifying here. Giving the models one file at a time.
I'm giving it, depending on what I'm working on, a lot of time I'll give it full access to my code base,
Okay.
or just if I know, that I'm going to be in these very specific files and that's all it needs, then I'll try to save myself some time by just giving it access to those specific files. But I try to give it as much context as possible so that this way it has the best opportunity to do the best work.
Gotcha, but more surgical. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I feel like I'm constantly dragging folders into the context, and that might actually be the opposite of what we want. Is this the case, Anoop? Am I missing the boat a bit here?
Yeah, I typically tend to just have like maybe a folder I'm working in, so the directory, or specific files that are associated with the directory I'm working in.
Gotcha. And we were talking a little bit about Codex before. Are you primarily using this in the command line, in like an IDE, or how does that work?
I mostly use the web version of Codex,
Okay.
actually, mostly because I really like the async like delegation pattern for coding agents nowadays. If I can just delegate a bit of work and then come back to a PR that's maybe fully done or like 80% of the way done, it helps a ton. Codex CLI is a bit different, right? Or Claude Code similarly, you would just send a request and then maybe you're like a bit more in the driver's seat. So it's like 2 different styles of maybe coding. I prefer using an IDE for the latter style, and then using like async agents for the former.
Gotcha. I like that. So you're kind of planting seeds in tabs, I would assume, that you're coming back to later and checking to see how far they've gone. I've certainly done that overnight. And once in a while I feel like I should have been up at 2 a.m. when this happened because I could have caught the problem. Do you ever get surprised by the results? Do you just roll back, re-roll?
Yeah, I think the models are never always perfect, so maybe I'm not surprised. It's like it just happens, and then you can either change the prompt or you see like some sparks of ideas. They're like, okay, I can take X, Y, and Z from this maybe totally busted PR and use it, and then the rest of it you can just throw away.
Gotcha. So you're almost taking notes about ideas or planting ideas and then coming back to them.
Yeah.
It sounds like note taking. It sounds like an Evernote or something like that. Like, oh, I had this brilliant idea. I put this in this tab. Okay, and then you just go back and check on the tabs.
Yeah.
Excellent. Does that jive for you, Diamond?
Yeah, mostly. I think Codex is one interesting one because it has its own VM, has its own kind of like limitations, though purposeful limitations on what you can do from within that VM. So it really depends on what I'm working on. But I do think like Cloud Code, for example, is kind of the opposite of that, where it's like it can get access to everything on your machine, but it means that it's using your machine. It's not like in the background, unless you have it on like your own. You set up your own VM or instance or something like that.
Or you buy a computer and relegate it to just running cloud.
Right. So it just kind of depends on what you're working on right now. But that's why I like Codex for kind of running different things in the background. But for more specific things that I'm working on in collaboration, it is usually Cursor.
Interesting. So there are a lot of tools out there. We talked a little bit about Cursor. We talked about using things on the web. We talked about VS Code. Are those the apps that we're all using? I think, I've tried Windsurf before. I've tried Cursor. I've tried a few of the more lesser known ones. And I won't say that I've found a winner, but Cursor seems to be the most stable for me. But I've also used a lot of the web tools. Like I actually do like the GitHub PR bot, for example, even just giving me help. Like, how do I reset head 3 or whatever it is? Like I want to go back to this specific version. How do I do that? I find it's actually pretty handy for. But does that encompass the tools that we're using, or are there others that we've missed?
Yeah, for the most part, I think I'm using github.com. I can open up Copilot in a chat, or I'm in VS Code with my Copilot extension and able to adjust anything from there. I love VS Code with Copilot. I think it's just so clean and so intuitive, and it's just easy to swap between models as I'm working, but still have all of that context from my conversation prior, because I can just copy and paste it, right there. So I think, that's the majority of what I'm using.
Gotcha, so you can resume with that context.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I heard a lot of Codex. I would assume that's kind of your preferred?
Yeah, so I guess I use a lot of different AI tools, and maybe that's the main thing that's helpful for the audience here is my recommendation is there's always going to be a new tool out there, and just always try new tools. And maybe you'll find one that fits for how you like to work. I think it's more important to continuously try new things, and then you will level up if a new tool is actually a lot better for whatever development workflow you're doing.
Gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that everyone is going to need slightly different things, and especially if you're not a dev working day to day as well. There's folks who like V0, there's folks who like Replit, Lovable, Bubble.io, a bunch of products like that are out there that make it super easy for you to kind of set up a front end, do deployment, do all these different things that maybe if you're not working in an existing code base every day that you want to be able to quickly do. And I think there's going to be more and more coming out every day. There's a lot of techniques we haven't actually really figured out how to collaborate with these systems yet. I think the Jira-like task Trello kind of thing and GitHub tasks or anything like that exists out there is another way we might end up going, bringing the agents to where we work. But we'll see.
Very interesting. Anoop, you touched on something interesting to me, is that you're trying to think about the future, but when I think of the past self of myself, in 2023, when I tried Vibecoding, things didn't go so well, at least at the time. You couldn't just say, hey, have at it. The code wasn't great, let's put it that. Is there a lesson there? Have things changed that much between 2023 to 2025?
I think so, and I hope so.
I didn't mean to direct this at you, sorry, it could be out of you, but picking on you, I guess, because you brought it up.
I think the models have gotten a lot better for coding specifically. I think all the labs want to make the models great for coding, and hopefully we are doing that. Because ideally, I think we want to make sure that everyone can be more productive at the roles they want to do, and I think coding is a pretty large part of that. So hopefully the answer is yes, but obviously there's still a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, Sweetbench says yes, but...
Sweetbench is a software engineer benchmark, I think?
Yeah, seems to be getting better every time. And I think that's a pretty big part of why people should come back to these systems again. I also find that there are a lot of folks who maybe try it without good intent, maybe that's the right way to put it, who are terribly, if you're really skeptical, and you just go and try it, it's not going to work very well if you don't really learn how to use any of these different systems, any of the different agents that are out there. And if you don't kind of think deeply about where it works well and where it doesn't, and kind of enter this new way of coding. And they'll kind of drop it on the ground. It's like the prompt kind of changes. It's like, I asked it to build the entire application. I gave it everything. I didn't just give it one feature, and it came back with crap. It's like, yeah, it's going to come back with crap if you do it that way. And you have to be a little bit more pointed in how you learn and how you leverage these tools, and which a lot of people are doing. But I think there's a good chunk of folks that probably should come back to it. Now's a good time to go try it out if you haven't been trying these things out in a while.
Does that jive with your experience as well?
Absolutely.
I've seen lots of nods.
Yeah,
All right.
I remember 2 years ago when my tab completions were questionable,
Right.
and now I can use it to build full features. So I agree 100%. If you left at some point, this is a wonderful time to come back. And I think it's especially cool for people that are more junior, because now you have this ability to learn at the same time as your senior and staff level engineers how to use these new tools. And so they don't have an upper hand on you on this. And that's like a really cool thing for someone that's more junior. So, and I think you can utilize these tools in one of two ways. You can use it to make yourself more lazy and let it do work for you, or you can use it to become a better engineer and output more work and better work. So I think we really have these options for us, but I think that the folks who are skeptical are just gonna, find the things that they want, and the folks that are really hopeful and excited about it will, find some incredible things as well.
Mm-hmm. You touched on something interesting there. It's more about that junior aspect, and ignoring the junior engineer for a moment. What I'm seeing more of is like citizen developers, so people who, maybe a VP, a director, a C-suite person who doesn't really know too much about coding, but knows enough about the business that they can describe what they want and will test out ideas. And for me, that feels like we're unlocking a whole other class of developer, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I can code.
That wasn't directed at you. Fair.
But I agree, yes.
You find it's good.
Yeah.
So the other question I had, we didn't really discuss this too much going into this, but I wonder about the utility of MCP, because it does feel like, for those who are already vibe coding, I wonder are there any MCPs that help you or don't help, or are there some that you avoid or really like? Is there like a must-have? Or for me, it's Puppeteer, I'll be honest. That's the one that I use a lot, because I don't know front end, and when learning front end, Puppeteer can load the site, take a screenshot, let me know if it's working or not.
I like any of the, not to plug Datadog, any of the observability ones.
Fair.
I think that if you're actually working with a real code base that's running, being able to get data back while you're kind of fixing
in the
problems
IDE,
in the IDE is useful. And that's one of the ones that I'm excited about, that have tried out ours and a few others out there.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah, maybe one, just a pattern I've seen from chatting with other folks as well at other companies is they basically have MCP servers that connect to any of their internal tooling that exists, and internal APIs that exist. And I think that's pretty helpful, because the model can then just pull context of how does this API work, or how can I request X pieces of information. And I think that's pretty interesting to see how an entire company's information can be used by a model.
I hadn't thought of that. The internal portal as a source for MCP. That's really cool.
That's exactly how I use it as well, yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing more, coming from MCP, and yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think there's some others for docs as well that I've used that I found interesting, depending on the tool that you're using. Sometimes docs are built in, sometimes they're not. Maybe you have to add the docs as context, but that can be a bit of a problem. I guess for the last closeout, so we talked about some tips, some tricks, some MCPs. Are there any other things that we've missed in this discussion before we get to the questions that we should talk about now?
I think for myself, the one thing I'd want to say is that you have to treat these agents kind of the same way we did with MapQuest when we were younger, and I'm really dating myself here, but you can always get there if you have the MapQuest directions in your hand, right? But the better the navigator is with those directions at keeping up with what's happening and when that turn is coming and what's going wrong maybe on the drive, the better your results are going to be. So just remember, if you're struggling at any point with any of these agents, and as things get better even, just, kind of take a look at yourself, and are you being the best navigator you can be to let the driver kind of drive during your vibe coding sessions? And I think if we all work on that, then I think we'll get the best results again.
I like that analogy. So we're going from printed maps to printed MapQuest to MapQuest to Google Maps or what have you. I like it. What about yourself, Anoop?
I just want to say use the tools. No matter what tools you use, I think it will hopefully help you do your jobs a lot easier, and then hopefully the models and the tooling gets a lot better as well. So it just makes your lives hopefully a lot easier.
I like that.
Yeah, for me, it is as you're thinking about taking anything that you might have vibe coded or you've improved, think a lot about how you're evaluating and how you're using the tools also for building out test sets, building out ways to try these different things out. Things like the Puppeteer tool let you try out, is it working? Don't just stop at the
does it actually work?
code.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to build a really strong end-to-end system that actually helps bring what you've written to production over time.
I like that. Yeah, we hadn't talked about testing a lot, and we're pretty much at time for the questions. But yeah, that's a really good point, is helping it write tests. So I think at this point, we've got about 5 minutes left, so probably time for 1, 2, maybe 3 if we're lucky questions. Are there any questions? Okay, I see people coming up.
Sure, hello, thanks. Have you ever considered checking your prompts into source control, or is there like a generative code aspect? If you ship something to production, you want to revisit it a year later, or do you have any other techniques that you'd recommend?
I don't think I've ever considered that, but I just have like my Google Doc just full of random prompts, but I assume it would be pretty nice to have that in source control as well.
Interesting.
I love that idea. Yeah, I think that'd be brilliant. It's not something I've done before. I have my own little subset of Google Doc prompts, but
Yeah, sometimes
be
see the
great.
rules or what have you land in a repo once in a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, I like the idea.
Excellent. I think you were first, then you? Oh, he was first? Okay, you go first.
Thank you for sharing. I guess my question is, do we understand yet the environmental impact of prompting AI so liberally in the ways that you guys are describing? Like, you guys mentioned parallel prompts and like going from 0 to 100 on a project and all that. Like, I use AI a lot, so I'm not like judging or anything. But I guess I'm still trying to understand its place in my life, especially with the carbon footprint. I even prompt the AI to be like, is this problematic? And they,
How much does this cost?
yeah, like they say concerning things. So I'm curious, like, what is the understanding around that at the moment?
Can I take a naive stab at this, and then maybe you can answer? So my understanding is that the models are trained first before you're using those. So there's API calls and maybe GPUs being used, but I think the bulk of the workload is prior to the model being considered final. Is that? Sorry, I didn't mean to direct this at you, Anoop, but I think that's the case.
Yeah, that's accurate. I don't have like full context on the exact utilization. I think there's been like some studies out there that you can take a look at for like environmental uses, but I don't have like the answer off the top of my head, unfortunately.
All right, thank you.
All right, next question.
So I think a lot of the vibe coding is mostly focused on like getting features out there. Have you guys had any experience on like the infrastructure? Because there are IAC tools, CDK and stuff that are available in different languages, or even GitHub Actions, like coding a GitHub action for an NPM build or something like that. Do you see that going forward being available, or do you see it mostly being feature-based?
Interesting you asked that. So one of the side projects I worked on, I actually did all of the CDK code that I worked on, at least, utilizing Copilot, and it's definitely the kind of thing where I feel like even every month over month, I'm seeing it getting better and better. I do think there's definitely room for improvement there, but I think we'll get there for sure. I don't know when, but
I've certainly used it for Terraform,
Yes.
and I thought I knew Terraform really well, but it's surprising. I think the issue is that the versions, I assume the cutoff was way earlier than it was, but I've been taught stuff about Terraform, so I would say at least for Terraform, it sounds great in CDK as well.
yeah, it's a great tool. I think that it involved, at least for myself, more human intervention than some other things that I was able to very quickly vibe code, but I mean, it was still incredibly helpful because I had never even seen CDK before, so.
Oh, thank you. Well, code is code. And most of my question comes from my friends vibe coding apps and then being like, hey, deploy this for me.
just ship it to prod, yeah. Okay, I think we'll get time for one last question. I think you were first.
Yeah. So following up a bit on the question about checking your prompts into version control, right? I do this planning process first, and I create these massive artifacts of how our app works and how we're going to implement features. And so what are you doing with that? I feel bad deleting those files when I open the PR. I want to check them in, but it's so noisy. And that's one of the problems we're working on my team is what do we do with this and how do we organize it and make it useful in the future?
Yeah, right now, like Google Drive. I don't recommend that though. But I have been thinking a lot about this. I think we're missing another layer of observability, let's say, where you want all the context that came with why you wrote something, almost a tribal knowledge of your AI agent that each of you kind of keep in your head. We do want to keep that somewhere. I don't have a solution for that yet, but I am thinking about it.
Yeah, one pattern I've seen is all of that I just try to summarize and put into like a cursor rules or like an agent MD file. So it gives some context for when a model does start doing some work, it knows where to start or what it's done in the past.
Very cool. Awesome. I think that's it. Thank you so much, folks. This is excellent. Thank you for the questions. Thank you.